Welcome to the next installment of the Train Vicar. Today I'll continue the series on the history of passenger trains in New Zealand, and I'll look at the most recent time, the time from 2008 to 2024. And for that I'm here at the Christchurch railway station where the Transalpine is about to leave, one of the few long passenger distance trains left in New Zealand. Like the other long-distance passenger trains in New Zealand, the Transalpine is operated by KiwiRail through its brand Great Journeys of New Zealand. KiwiRail was established in 2008 when the government bought back the railway operations from Toll Holdings, including all rolling stock. That was because Toll Holdings and Ontrack could not reach agreement on the access fees to the railway network. A few years earlier, Ontrack had taken over maintenance of the railway network and Toll Holdings' operations of trains. However, the agreement could not be reached, and the government realized that there was popular support for railways in New Zealand, and so it decided to buy back the railways in 2008 and incorporate the past operations of Toll Holdings, or the railway operations of Toll Holdings, and Ontrack together into KiwiRail. Some of the logistics of Toll Holdings were kept by the company, and KiwiRail concentrated on line haul of freight and passenger transport, both long distance and urban, in Wellington, as well as the inter-islander ferry. The name KiwiRail was probably chosen because it was a brand of the then Labour government, which had earlier introduced Kiwi Bank, a local bank, and KiwiSaver, a retirement savings scheme. So KiwiRail was the progression of that. However, in October 2008, the Labour government was defeated and a new national-led government came into office. This was fairly hostile to rail, but they decided not to sell rail, but put rail onto a commercial footing as quickly as possible. But it realized that some investment was required for that to happen. So they agreed to the purchase of new locomotives, which were later the DL locomotives from China, some investment in the railway infrastructure, and also some new passenger carriages. 17 of these new AK class passenger carriages were built at the KiwiRail Hillside workshops in Dunedin. They were both normal passenger cars and also cafe cars. They were quite heavily influenced by Swiss panoramic passenger carriages and looked somewhat similar. They were first introduced on the coastal Pacific in 2011, but then switched to a new train on the North Island. The Overlander had previously been hauled by diesel locomotives between Wellington and Palmerston North, then by electric locomotives from Palmerston North to Hamilton, and then there was again a switch from electric to diesel between Auckland and Hamilton. Now, the Northern Explorer ran only 3 times a week with these new panoramic passenger cars, and it was hauled by diesel locomotive throughout. It stopped at fewer places, and the prices were also significantly increased. KiwiRail brought the same model to the other long-distance trains, the Coastal Pacific and the Transalpine. They now also use the more comfortable scenic carriages with panoramic views, and they were also upgraded in the service, and additionally the fares were increased quite significantly. This service was clearly aimed at tourists, not at locals, and KiwiRail fully leaned into that new service model. The Capital Connection is a commuter train that runs from Palmerston North to Wellington on weekday mornings, and then it returns back to Palmerston North in the afternoon. For many years that was offered on a commercial basis by New Zealand Rail, then TransScenic, and finally KiwiRail. In 2012, KiwiRail indicated that it might not be able to continue to operate the Capital Connection unless the service was subsidised. And so in 2015, an agreement was reached with the regional councils to subsidise that service. The Greater Wellington Regional Council had planned to upgrade the Wellington suburban services for quite some time. It still had quite a few old trains from the 1950s running in that fleet as well, together with electric multiple units from the 1980s. So in 2007, the Greater Wellington Regional Council ordered new electric multiple units from Hyundai Rotem, or Rotem as it was called then. But at that time, the Wellington region had a few capacity problems in the mid to late 2000s. The trains were too full, and really, relief could not wait until the new trains arrived. They needed capacity now. So 2 old electric multiple units were taken from museums and reactivated. Some electric locomotives that had previously operated through the Otira Tunnel in the Southern Alps were also refurbished, and they were used together with passenger carriages that had been rebuilt from former British rail carriages. These temporary trains were in service from 2008 to late 2011. The new FP-class electric multiple units were introduced from late 2010. After a competition, they were given the name Matangi, meaning wind in Te Reo Maori. For that, networks upgrades were also required as the new trains drew more power. Now, initially, it actually was thought that the Gans Mawag units from the 1980s would be upgraded and run for another 15 to 20 years or something like that. But Hyundai Rotem offered Greater Wellington Regional Council a good deal, so that it decided to buy 5 more Matangi units and take the old trains out of service. And so now all electric trains in Wellington are operated by these units. Meanwhile, in Auckland, the national government continued plans for the electrification of the lines, which was initiated by the previous government. New electric multiple units were purchased from CAF or CAF in Spain, and they are now known as the AM class. These EMUs arrived in Auckland in 2014 and started operations on the Onehunga line in April 2014. Now, in July 2015, the electric trains took over all the suburban services except for shuttle service between Pukekohe and Papakura. This shuttle service was run until 2022 by the old ADL class diesel rail cars. In November 2016, an earthquake hit the area near Kaikoura on the east coast of the South Island. This destroyed both the railway line and the state highway. The government decided to rebuild both the highway and the railway line. The railway line actually could be opened before the road, and so freight trains used this section again from September 2017. The Coastal Pacific passenger train returned to operate between Christchurch and Picton in November 2018. At the reopening, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern announced that 80 million had been given to KiwiRail from the Provincial Growth Fund to upgrade its tourism passenger services. Now, it's a bit typical for politicians to give a lot of numbers, and they were thrown about, and it wasn't quite clear what was happening. So later on, it was made clear that the funding was for 10 new carriages, the upgrade of 3 existing carriages to premium class, the rebuild of 5 old carriages as luggage vans or kitchen cars, and the upgrade of several platforms and the booking system. This would benefit the Northern Explorer, the Coastal Pacific, and the Transalpine, and it would allow more frequent and longer trains to be able to cope with the capacity. In 2020, of course, like in the rest of the world, the coronavirus hit and all tourism in New Zealand ceased. New Zealand pretty much shut itself off from the world until 2022. After suspending long-distance rail services in March 2020, KiwiRail restarted them in July 2020 with the Transalpine. But that had to be at drastically reduced fares because now the locals wanted to go on there. I was on the first train then in July 2020. It was probably one of the fullest trains that had operated long distance for a long time. But further lockdowns then meant that services had to be suspended again and again, and so in December 2021, KiwiRail announced that it would not restart passenger services, but rather offer only package tours. In response to that, the organisation Save Our Trains successfully campaigned against it, and KiwiRail actually restarted services again in January 2022, fairly soon. Nowadays it offers package tours alongside the standard train fares. Now, KiwiRail had already called for tenders for the new carriages that were funded through the Provincial Growth Fund, but the project was actually changed during the coronavirus pandemic. Actually, about 60 million was repaid to the government. KiwiRail did not purchase any new carriages, but upgraded several carriages for the Scenic Plus class and converted old Auckland suburban carriages to kitchen cars. So, Great Journeys of New Zealand is now offering very expensive gourmet experiences, partly funded by the taxpayer. After so much hope for better services, a few wealthy people now benefit. In August 2017, the transport blog Greater Auckland presented a concept for regional rapid rail between Auckland, Hamilton and Tauranga. Now, many of those concepts had been promoted and investigated and so on, but this one seemed to have grabbed the imagination of politicians. The proposal probably underestimated the difficulties in establishing such services, but it gave an overall vision. The opposition Labour Party at the time promised to start on the vision if it was elected. Well, the Labour Party found itself in government from 2017 onwards. Together with the Waikato Regional Council, it worked on a plan to establish a train between Hamilton and Auckland using old rebuilt carriages and diesel locomotives. The service was named Te Huia. After delays due to COVID, the service started in April 2021. Initially, patronage was not really high, but it built up considerably by now. When the National Party formed a coalition government in late 2023, there were fears that the service would be discontinued. But the Transport Agency confirmed funding in May 2024, but at a reducing level. In recent years, reliability problems have plagued the suburban train network in Auckland, mainly due to old infrastructure and inadequate maintenance for such a heavily used network as it now is. That seems to be improving. Together with a new tunnel under the central city, the City Rail Link, there is hope that services in Auckland can be more reliable and frequent, and in future patronage may increase again. So what's my conclusion on the history of passenger trains in New Zealand? Well, that this history reflects history in general. There have been good and bad developments, and they have affected land and people. But it's actually a miracle in a sense, with all the forces aligned against them, that passenger trains still continue to be here and still serve the people in places. Of course, there's so much lost potential. They could have done so much more and could continue to do so much more, and that is important. As I said initially, the Bible is also a lot about history. When everything seems to have been lost, when evil seems to have triumphed, God brings hope again and again and gives us new life and hope for the future. I think something like that is happening throughout history and has also happened here in New Zealand. So we can continue to have hope and look forward and give thanks for all the good that has been done.
In the land down under, where the winds blow free, lies a tale of railways, a turbulent history. Since 1863, they've rolled on the tracks, moving people and goods, never looking back. They built this country, connected it all, provided the lifeline for both big and small. But short-sightedness and self-interest prevail. Railways not fully developed, potential derail. Steel tracks